Warren Einerson and his friends, and all of you for making this possible. I think there might be 50 people in the room, and I calculated, since the United States is 1,000 times bigger in population, this is the equivalent to speaking to 50,000 people in a baseball stadium. So you are the biggest crowd of my life. Thank you. My goal tonight, this is the first of 3 lectures, as I think Thorarin pointed out. We hope you'll come back tomorrow and indeed the following night. The World Depression and the Dangers of the Obama Regime. Tonight, though, it's all about you. It's all about Iceland and your struggle against the international financier oligarchy. The British, the Dutch, the European Commission, the European Central Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and others. You are now under attack by those forces. You are in effect in a kind of a financial war. When Gordon Brown pulled out that anti-terror legislation to use against you, this is basically a declaration of war. This takes things out of the sphere of usual diplomatic negotiations. If you start calling a country terrorist, well, maybe the British are terrorists too. That seems to be what they're doing. The idea of a debt moratorium, of course, is the idea that you should stop paying international debt. Don't pay. It's an institution that, as you will see, has been around for a long time. I do have this intervention paper I think Thorarin mentioned. If you give us an email address, we can send you a free copy of a special paper that I wrote. It's advice to Iceland, to the government, the political forces, the trade unions, all kinds of associations, individuals of goodwill. We have a few copies, but mainly we'd like to send them to you. What do I know? Who am I? Why should you listen to me, care what I think? I have visited about 45 or 50 countries over the years. I've studied debt moratoria in these countries, Ghana, Mexico, and Argentina. My introduction to debt moratorium actually came from the Ghana ambassador to Rome about 1974, a guy called Colonel Taki Menson, who had been the information minister in a government that had declared a debt moratorium. And he told me about how they had to fight to keep their country together. Mexico, in the 1980s, there was something called La Bomba de la Deuda, the debt bomb, to be used against the British during the Malvinas or Falkland Islands War. And then, of course, Argentina, which I'll talk to you about a little bit later. I have actually advised politicians and governments. In Italy, I advised a group of left-wing senators in the Italian Senate who wanted to have a debt moratorium to defend their country. In Poland, I was called in by a man called Jerzy Malec. He was the head of the Bank Narodowy, the central bank of Poland. That was in 1983. I urged him to declare a debt moratorium on $28 billion of Polish debt. And also in Rome, in about 1987, I conferred with some advisors to President Alan Garcia of Peru. We'll hear more about him in a minute. So I have some idea what I'm talking about in a practical sense. This is my book, Surviving the Cataclysm. There's a sample copy back there. I think Thorarin explained we have copies coming in. They're stuck at the airport. They'll be here tomorrow. But if you want to make sure you get a copy, you can turn to Thorarin Einerson, and he will help you with that. If you want to keep in touch with what I'm thinking and saying, this is a radio program on the internet. World Crisis Radio. You go to gcnlive.com. It's free, on demand, any time of the day or night. You click on this and you hear a 2-hour briefing of the week. There's a new program every Saturday. Now the crisis, of course, revolves around these Icelandic branch banks in the United Kingdom and in the Netherlands. And that's the Dutch Spaarbank IceSave. This is the Dutch version. In the midst of a world financial panic about a year ago, as you know, there was a panic run on these banks. Oh, there were panic runs on many banks. There were panic runs on Bear Stearns, panic runs on Lehman Brothers. panic runs on AIG, and you were swept in to the maelstrom of a world financial panic. Of course, criminality is involved. There's a saying in the US financial community, you can't see who is swimming naked with no clothes on until the tide goes out. The tide goes out, you see who's naked. And when the depression hits, the tide of money goes out, and you can see all the embezzlement and the crimes of the various bankers. And that, of course, you know better than I do. But it is a world financial panic. Now, the British, I speak now as a historian with a PhD in early modern European history. The British have a bad reputation for treachery. I don't know whether you have this in your language, but here are three rather representative European languages. In French we say, perfide Albion. Albion is a kind of a poetic name for the British. It means they're treacherous. You can't trust them. In German, das perfida Albion. And in Italian, la perfida Albione. So what does this point to? There's a certain accumulated wisdom of the European peoples that you can't trust the British. And I urge you to find an expression in your own language that says maybe we could think of one tonight if we have a poet or a novelist. I think we do. Apparently the most literate population in the world. I'm sure you'll find a way. Now, interesting is that the British have this habit of when there is a depression, the British try to export the crisis to others. That's what they're trying to do to Europe. Let's take the case of Lehman Brothers. In many ways, the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers begins the really acute phase, or first phase, of the world financial panic in the middle of September of last year, 1 year ago. How did Lehman Brothers go bankrupt? Well, they had a whole weekend at the New York Federal Reserve to find a buyer for Lehman Brothers. And if they found a buyer, the panic might have been at least delayed. Barclays Bank came forward and said, we will buy Lehman Brothers. And it got to be late on Sunday afternoon. At 8 o'clock in the evening, New York time, the Japanese market would open. They needed a solution by 8 o'clock New York time, Sunday evening, on that fateful weekend. Barclays said, we'll buy it. Except at 7 o'clock, with about 1 hour to go, when it was too late to find an alternative, the British regulators said, no, no go. Meaning that in many ways, the British are themselves responsible for this acute phase of the world financial panic. So what has been done to you has been done to others, to the US, and in many ways, to the world. The Anglo-Dutch, I talk about the Anglo-Dutch, it means the British and the Dutch, the English and the Dutch. Essentially these merged, as you see over here with my laser, they merged when William of Orange became the King of England in 1688. This is called the Glorious Revolution. Oh, glorious, glorious. Since then you deal with the Anglo-Dutch. And the symbol of their unity, of course, is Royal Dutch Shell, which is in many ways the most important oil company in the world. It is the flagship of the world oil cartel, right? The Seven Sisters, or whatever they call it today. Now the big question for you, of course, is Gordon Brown, the British and the Dutch demand money from you. $6 billion, 4 billion euros. Gordon Brown said, 20 billion pounds, that Iceland had stolen 20 billion pounds of British money. Should you pay? Well, my answer is no, but before we even get to no, you can't pay. Paying is a physical impossibility. You can't get blood out of a stone. You can't get blood out of a turnip, right? Raven? Right? You can't get blood out of something that has nothing left in it. There is no way in the physical universe that Iceland, with I believe a gross domestic product of $12 billion, is that about right? 11, 12 billion, can pay $6 billion over the next 50 years or even 100 years, because, of course, the 5.5% or more interest is working in the background. Now, you have to get ready, therefore, to fight. You had the spirit. I remember when I was younger, the Cod Wars, right? When those little Icelandic patrol vessels would go up against the British destroyers and cruisers in the North Atlantic, right? You have got to be steadfast like Gunnar Hildarenda and independent like Gertrude, but with a happy ending. But now, watch out. Zombies ahead. Who are your enemies in this, right? Fighting means you got to know the enemy. Zombies are ahead. Orgar. Right? Actually, from having read the sagas, at least some of them, I know the equivalents. Here's one of the head zombies. This is one of the people, is an architect of the present crisis. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer for 10 years under Tony Blair. Everything with derivatives, speculation, deregulation, hot money, the casino economy, globalization. This fine gentleman is involved. He took New Labour and moved it to the right of the Conservative Party. That Labour Party is worse than the Tories, worse than the British Conservatives. During the crisis, he was running around with his hair on fire. Right? He was hysterical. He is also the pioneer of the bailouts. Right? Here in the United States, we are afflicted with bailouts. Right? Obama has a $24 trillion bailout of Wall Street going. The idea for the bailouts comes from Gordon Brown. It started with the panic run on Northern Rock in about October of 2007, so 2 years ago now. This is the beginning of the events of 2008. The British, obviously, attempted to export the crisis. They said you have the dollar, the pound, and the euro. And their hope was the euro goes down, the dollar goes down, and the pound dominates the world. It is the project of Gordon Brown and Tony Blair to recreate London as the financial capital of the world. And you are being expected to pay for this megalomaniac ambition of the British. This, in the 1930s, the British were known for a strategy called beggar my neighbor. Export the depression, make the other people poor. And it simply does not work. Don't forget Alistair Darling, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He's very much a part of this. There he is. He's doing bank nationalizations. Really, he's trying to save the derivatives. He's obviously a puppet. And the Bank of England. This fortress, as you see, look, it's built like a fort. It's a huge building. Not very democratic. And that's Mervyn King, the governor of the Bank of England. If you don't know who these people are, you better know, because those are your enemies. They're coming after you. They know where you live. Do you know where they live? And we can't forget the Dutch. This is the reactionary right-winger Balkenende. And his zombie overtones have been noted by various cartoonists, right? Notice the obvious symbolism. So, what you're dealing with is a collection of zombie bankers and political spokesmen for them. The Droigar Banka. Now, suppose you try to pay. Well, you can't pay, but suppose you try to pay. You will get depopulation through immigration. Right? If you have 300,000 people, you will join Russia with a population that's going down. Russia took shock therapy in the 1990s from the IMF. Their population is falling. Their lifespan is shrinking. Russia has some reserves. You don't have it. You can't do this. You'll get a falling standard of living. You will lose the most important advantage you have. And again, you probably have the most highly trained, most literate, most capable workforce in the world. And you will lose it if you try to pay. You will have despair and disorientation among your youth. They will have no future. You will see narcotics, prostitution, and all the rest of it. And all of that will decrease your ability to pay. So it just doesn't work. There's no point. I would also call the attention of the governing party here, the Social Democrats, to the news from yesterday, the German election of yesterday. The German SPD, the Social Democrats, right, Sozialdemokraten, have fallen to 23%. They are no longer a Volkspartei, right? They are no longer a people's party. They're becoming a sect. They're collapsing. What is the lesson? If you're a Social Democrat and you try to serve bankers, you will be swept away. You will be history. You'll be gone. Social Democrats are supposed to defend the interests of labor and the unemployed and the working people in general. And if they don't, they're finished. So the German SPD, this is the worst result for them in 100 years. It's a party that may soon cease to exist. And it's not just them, of course. Remember Jospin, at the beginning of this decade, of the French Socialist Party, Jospin had the same fate himself. So a friendly warning, because I like Social Democrats, but there's a friendly warning. You cannot make yourself into the enforcers for bankers. Now, you're told you should pay because there's an upswing, there's a recovery in the world, and if you make concessions, you can join the recovery. No. Look at world trade. World trade is going down. This is the best measure, but even before we get to that, we have derivatives. These are the Afleiding. Okay, you heard it. Derivatives, credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations, structured investment vehicles, mortgage-backed securities, asset-backed securities, toxic paper, poisonous assets. Right? In German, Giftpapiere. Gift. These are derivatives. This is a very low estimate. This is 700 trillion. This is about half of the real amount. The real amount is about 1.5 quadrillion. That is 1,500 trillion US dollars. This is simply the estimates for the over-the-counter derivatives. But this is the cause. This is the thing that has been going up in the world. But now here's world trade. World trade has lost about 25% since this crisis began. This is the current world trade statistics compared to 1929. So 1929 was a bit sharper on the way down. This is now a globalized economy. This is the whole world now. It's a bigger world. So it's taking longer to go down, but you can see the trend, right? And this is simply a blip at the end. Let's look at some countries. Look at this. This is from June to June. You can see the average loss is between 1/4 and 1/3 of the exports of the main countries of the world. Let's just look at some of the obvious ones. Let's take the two classic export economies, right? Here's Germany. They're down 29%. Here's Japan, down 31%. Europe generally down about 25%. Look, Taiwan, very export dependent. They were down about 40%, and they bounced back a little bit. The US, still an exporter of some things, down 25%. So Canada, 40%. I mean, some of this stuff is quite dramatic. Korea, similar losses. That's the big picture. That's world trade, right? Welthandel. That is the overarching question of the world depression. And then you see it again here, right? This is world trade from the decade, the beginning of the decade until now. And you can see how it goes down, and it's calculated in various ways. So there is no recovery to join. You should not make concessions to join a non-existent recovery. The train is not leaving the station. Don't buy a ticket. The train is not leaving. Don't give them your money. Now, the other question for Iceland is, should you have a debt moratorium where you say, we will not pay, and we'll talk about the details in a minute, or the 6% solution? Sorry about that. 6%, of course, that future GDP growth can be measured, and Iceland is prepared to pay 6% of that to the British and the Dutch. Does that make any sense? Well, I would say the 6% solution still puts your future similar to Germany under the reparations of Versailles after 1919, right, back in the 1920s, in the Weimar Republic. Here's Versailles, right, the Hall of Mirrors. Germany had to accept war guilt. You have ice-save guilt. This was war guilt, and they say Germany must pay the cost of the war, because Germany is responsible. 85 billion gold marks. Trying to pay a foreign debt of 85 billion gold marks caused what? Hyperinflation. This is the cause of the German hyperinflation of 1923. If you're always selling the Icelandic krona, or the German mark, it goes down and down and down, and then the British, of course, help you along with various attacks. That hyperinflation reached 1 trillion to 1. 1 trillion to 1. So, and the social effects of this are unbelievable. Here it is from another point of view. Germany, from 1918 to 1923, there's your hyperinflationary curve, and it gets up to 1 trillion to 1. 1 trillion paper marks to buy 1 gold mark. Hyperinflation. Your future will be hyperinflation under any attempt to pay this money. And that's going to be you going to the supermarket to buy a few things to put in a bag. You're going to be taking the money in a wheelbarrow. The one thing that Germany did in those days, which I would point out, is the so-called Rapallo policy, which is to say, well, if you're going to be so mean and nasty to us, we will look for friends where we can find them. This is what you must learn to do. In those days, it was economic cooperation with Soviet Russia. You have got to be great realists. You must be innovative and not bound by custom or tradition. This is a very fine person. Walter Rathenau was the foreign minister of Germany in those years. He is the one who made this deal with Russia. This was the good thing that he was able to do. He was then assassinated. Another thing to watch out for, right? Here he is, the coffin. This is the German Reichstag in 1923. This is the Staatsakt for his funeral. But this is the Rapallo Conference. This is the German Chancellor Wirth and the Soviet negotiator Chicherin. And they make a deal which says, let's put German industry together with Russian natural resources and space. There are other aspects to this that are military we won't go into. Some of these are problematic. But generally speaking, this is a good idea. So, let's now look, though, at this question of the 10% solution, the 6% solution. Iceland says 6% of future GDP growth. Alan Garcia of Peru in 1985, and I hope people have heard about this because you've got to study it, and it's written up. A short sketch of that is included in this paper that you're invited to get. He said, not GDP, he said, I will pay 10% of my foreign exchange earnings. The money that I earn with exports, I'll give the banks 10%. As you see, this is actually more clever than what Iceland is proposing, I think, because GDP is not how you pay a foreign debt. The only way you can pay a foreign debt is by having hard currency earnings, euros, dollars, special drawing rights, gold, something like this. So he says, the key thing is, out of what I earn, I'll give you 1/10. I think it's more clever. But still, this was a tragic failure. People who want to recommend the 6% solution today have to go back to the 10% solution of Alan Garcia and see what the result was. And it did not work. And I don't think it will work for you. And I guess the current situation is you're waiting for the Dutch and the British to respond. I hope, I pray, that they will say no. They should say no. Please let them say no, because that will leave you off the hook. Then you say, okay, debt moratorium, or say it even sooner. There's Alan Garcia. He meant very well. He's actually back in power now. I don't know what that means, but in those days, this was the big initiative to do something about the debt. People who advise you to pay the 6% should be challenged. If this failed in Peru, how is it going to work here? When actually his, as I say, his approach was a little bit more clever. You're always dealing with what is called banker's arithmetic. Banker's arithmetic is the more you pay, the more you owe. You pay more, you owe more. Banker's arithmetic. Because the magic of compound interest is working against you now. 5.5% is way too high. And again, look at the problems with the percentage offers. You lose your moral, legal, and political high ground. Right? You're basically saying, yeah, we should pay, but we can't pay, so we'll try to pay. Ugh. This is very weak, very, very weak. There's no clean break. If you're paying anything, there's always the temptation to pay more, and maybe they'll be nice to you if you pay them a little bit more, but they won't. The danger of internal divisions is that any scheme of paying means that some people in Iceland will be imposing sacrifices on other people in Iceland. And this will cause the crisis inside the country. That is what you see in Weimar Germany with the attempt to pay the reparations. The bankers are at war with you no matter what you do. If you say, well, we'll pay 6% of the GDP, the bankers will say, you are communists, you are terrorists, we're coming after you. There's no point. They're going to wage war on you anyway. The other question again, the compound interest in the background, 5.5%. This is outrageous. Why 5.5%? It's too high. You'll never succeed. You'll pay and pay and pay, and then in 20 years the debt will be even bigger. So all the money you pay is lost. And you can use that money here to strengthen your society economically. Now, just like Germany, you need new partners. You've got to look around and get some new people. Start here. He's a great realist. See what he has to offer, right? Don't trust anybody. Don't sell out, right? You're not going to be occupied, right? That's not the point. It's business. Business, 50-50, normal business. What could be wrong with that? If not, try them. Try Russia, China, Venezuela, Indonesia, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa. You can try just about anybody. Try. You've got a foreign ministry. You've got some diplomats. Get to work. Send them out. Seriously. What's the point of having the foreign ministry? Notice that in the middle of this, forget about left-wing, right-wing. I don't know what that means anymore. The fight that I see in today's world is elitism against populism. I see oligarchs against working people. That's the mentality that I see. And I think that's the new class struggle or the new political division. Now, the institutions that will not help you, let's just have some fun and look at them for a minute, huh? Most of these institutions are made worthless by monetarism, or neoliberalism if you like, but I think monetarism is really the term, and elitism. Let's see some of the bad guys. Well, let's start with the International Monetary Fund here in Washington, near where I live. The IMF. This is an imperial institution. You do not want to deal with them. You have borrowed money from them. You must pay that money back immediately. Get out of their clutches, right? Their claws, right? The krallen, whatever they are, right? Get out of their grip. They impose conditionality on you. They destroy your national sovereignty. They dictate to you what to do. Conditionality, letter of intent. They have no success stories in their history. Their method has never worked. They deal in something called the Washington Consensus. What does the Washington Consensus mean? Deregulation, privatization, bust all the unions, no trade unions, no labor, the race to the bottom, no state sector, lower the standard of living, cut public services, no health, no education, no welfare, not for anybody. Pay the debt. This is a failure. Everybody in the world is sick of them. Instead of the Washington consensus, people want what is now being called the Beijing consensus. The Beijing consensus is basically mutual advantage. Arrangements among equal partners, 50-50. What the Chinese do in Africa. So that's certainly worth getting into. It is better if you have borrowed money from the IMF, borrow other money from a country, go to Venezuela, go to some oil producer, borrow the money from them, pay the IMF, get the IMF out of your life, and then you'll be dealing with a peer, another country, not with this overarching supranational imperial institution. So pay the IMF loan right away to escape conditionality. Remember, the IMF always fails. They are the breakers of countries, the destroyers of countries, and nothing but. How about Europe? Unfortunately, it's the Europe of the banks and the cartels. The European Union, I'm afraid, is dominated, and I say this with sorrow and reluctance too, because it took me a while to figure this out myself. It is anti-popular, it's an elitist oligarchy. I've lived in the European Economic Community for about a fourth or fifth of my life. But there it is. And the center of evil, of course, is the central bank. You must look especially to the real center of power, is not the European Commission, bad as that is, but it is the European Central Bank. There it is. A monstrous institution that is so far removed from the working people of Europe that there is no connection. This is harder to influence even than the US Federal Reserve. It is a clique of unaccountable, unelected bankers who make all the decisions behind the scenes based on oligarchical interest. Anybody know? Tricher! Tricher! The word tricher in French means to cheat. Right? If you have a card up your sleeve, il triche. Il triche. Spielt falsch. Get the idea? This is Monsieur Trichet. He's a monetarist. Are you going to make him the Duke of Iceland, the new dictator of the country? It's out of the question. Oh, Barroso. Now this dubious Iberian politician from Portugal. We have to remember Portugal was under fascism for about 40 years, and I think we have the cultural damage. He wants to be re-elected. He wants to be reappointed to head the European Commission. Right? This is the face of Europe? 650 million people in Europe come down to this? It's not worthy. Certainly Europe deserves better than that. And of course, they're all concerned with political control, certainly. But the goal is always the interests of bankers, the bailouts, the derivatives, things like this. Now remember, whenever European populations have been asked to vote on the European Constitution of 2005 or the Lisbon Treaty of today, they say no. As you see here, this is your main left-wing French union, right? CGT. A no by the trade unions to a liberal, neoliberal, monetarist Europe. Good. Here's another one. Vote no for the Constitution. This was 2005. I was fortunate to be in France at that time. Yes to Europe, but not the Europe of the bosses. Okay? These are left-wingers. These may be right-wingers. They don't like it either. They don't like the European Constitution. This is a Republican no. French Republic. Probably a right-wing thing. So remember, when you're dealing with the fight of populists against elitists, you're going to find left-wing components and right-wing components joining on the populist side. You've got to learn to live with that. You've got to learn to like it. Here's the Dutch, right? They don't like it either. 27 ways to say no, that no doesn't really mean no. Because every time you say no, the European Commission comes back and says, try again, like Ireland. We'll see Ireland. The Dutch. Right? So here's the French result. This is 2005. No. And here's the Dutch. The Dutch, even less support for the European Constitution. Now they said, okay, in Brussels, the Eurogarchs and Eurocrats said, we can't do it that way, we'll do it as a treaty. We'll have the Lisbon Treaty. So here's Ireland, last year already, voted no. Ireland voted no already once. Here's Sinn Féin, right, with their own history, but in this case they say, no, get a better deal on Europe. No, don't be bullied. Lisbon vote. And here is a demonstration in Berlin. They don't like the Lisbon Treaty. It's a dictatorship and it's terrorism, right? That's the idea here. So vote no. Irish friends vote no. And that vote will be now on the 2nd of October, this coming week, okay? If you know anybody in Ireland, send them a telegram, vote no. This is a group of friends of mine. This is the Volksinitiative. This is people like Jürgen Elsässer, the writer, and Christoph Hörstel, the Middle East expert. No to the European Union dictatorship, and they want a referendum, a plebiscite, right? That the people should vote on this, at least, right? So have a plebiscite on the Lisbon Treaty. This was a demonstration in Berlin about a month ago now, which drew a couple of thousand people. And here it is, right? They want a referendum against the European Union here in Berlin, Friedrichstraße, I think. Now, in the German election of yesterday, one of the parties that did well is the left-wing party, right? Die Linke, Venstre, I guess it would be, something like this. They gained about 3% on a significantly anti-European Union and anti-Afghan war program, right? Here's the left-wing party, no to the Lisbon Treaty. And they're also in favor of getting out of Afghanistan. The German Green Party in favor of all the wars. Amazing. Green Party, warmonger party. So what you need is an unlimited debt moratorium. It simply says, for 5 years, or for the duration of this world economic depression, no payments will be made. At the end of 5 years, and indeed in the meantime, we can talk. But we will not accept the language of threats. We will not accept the language of force or the threat of force. This is an independent sovereign country. Don't tell us about terror laws. We have them too. So therefore, it's an unlimited debt moratorium. Now, in the case of the usual debt moratorium, it's usually debts that have actually been contracted. In other words, things that have actually been signed for. In your case here, I don't see any debt at all. In other words, the goal of these negotiations ought to be to get the other side to admit that you don't owe them anything. I don't think you do. You never made this commitment. The commitment is completely dictated by the British and the Dutch. Now, the debt moratorium. Since about 1980, not even to go back any further, in the last 30 years, the third of the century, we see debt moratoria at the rate of about 1 a year. There are always several countries who are carrying out debt moratoria. It is simply a structural, physiological feature of the globalized world economy. And you can see countries of all kinds, big, little, left, right, Muslim, Catholic, Latin American, Eastern European, African, South Asian, look at them all. And very big ones. Brazil, 1987. Chile, right? Darling of the financiers. Big countries, Mexico, Arab countries, Morocco, huge oil producers, Nigeria, Pakistan, 180 million people. Here's Lopez Portillo of Mexico, debt moratorium 1982. I think rather successful, not a bad guy at all. Big countries, Peru we'll talk about, Philippines, Poland, Russia, a nuclear superpower, debt moratorium, 1998, 1999. Turkey, Ukraine, Uruguay, and another oil producer. So this is about a cross-section of the world, isn't it? There's certainly no shame in joining the ranks. I don't think. I think this is an honor roll of countries that have had the guts to fight for their own future and their own survival. Here's Nestor Kirchner of Argentina. See the nice Argentine colors? This is the guy who administered the most recent big debt moratorium. The debt moratorium started in December of the year 2001. Argentina, the debt moratorium. What did he obtain? He obtained a cut of 1/2. He was able to reduce the demands of the bankers by 50%. Now that, I submit, is something, and I think you can do better. Argentina had some rough times during this debt moratorium. The main problem they have is that their social safety net was very weak. You have a rather robust and capable social safety net. You would do much better than Argentina. The other thing he did was at the end of this process, he owed the IMF $10 billion. He went to Venezuela and borrowed the $10 billion and paid that to the IMF to get the IMF off his back, to get the IMF out of Argentina. So he said, IMF, disappear, go home, scram. I don't want you anymore. It's actually 2001. So the result is a cut by about 50%. Now, a couple of other things you can do. You should accumulate stockpiles of oil and critical raw materials. Don't send your money overseas. Whatever the things you need, oil, obviously, other raw materials, bauxite, I guess, or maybe you have that. But the things that you need to import, get some stockpiles, build them up. You need to think about direct barter deals with other nations outside of the World Trade Organization rules. Because the World Trade Organization is equally bankrupt, along with the IMF, the World Bank, the European Union, and these other financier-dominated institutions, right? You have cod, you have aluminum, you have certain agricultural products that people will be glad to have. Use that to cover part of your import dependence. Generally speaking, I would recommend reforms inspired by the Franklin D. Roosevelt New Deal in the United States. Let's just look at a couple of those. This would include a re-regulation of the financial sector and a phase-out of derivatives and generally measures to reduce speculation in your economy. And again, it's not communism. It's the most American thing there is. Right? This was 4 terms of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Here's a good guy. The late Professor James Tobin, Nobel Prize from Yale. And he's associated with the famous Tobin tax. Let's get some new rules for global finance. Certainly the old rules have not been working very, very well. Let's see if we have the Tobin tax here. Yes, here we go. The Tobin tax is like a sales tax for bankers. It's 1%, it can be other sums, but I recommend 1%, on financial transactions, including derivatives. Stocks, bonds, options, futures, foreign exchange, commodities, financial flows. 1%. There was such a tax in the United States from the 1930s until about 1970. It was called the stamp tax. It's sometimes called a securities transfer tax, a trading tax, a Tobin tax, a sales tax for bankers. It is a way to make the bankers pay for the depression. With such a tax, you discourage speculation and derivatives, and you've seen how destructive those are. You increase the money coming into the public treasury to finance the social safety net and other urgent projects like infrastructure and so forth. And you get the benefit of economic populism. A political party that runs on this is going to have, I think, some success. And I'm trying to get politicians, and other people like me are trying to get politicians in the United States to make this a demand. I'm happy to say The AFL-CIO, the American Federation of Labor Congress of Industrial Organizations, it's the biggest trade union in the United States. It's not as big as it used to be, of course, but it's there. AFL-CIO. They are campaigning for a 1% Tobin tax. There are well-known economists. If you've ever heard of Robert Kuttner of the American Prospect magazine, he's also campaigning for a Tobin tax, a universal tax on financial transactions. But now let's look at some domestic infrastructure. The general idea here is that when you face a crisis, you've got to do things to increase the productivity of labor in your country, and you've got to make permanent additions to your capital stock under your own guaranteed control in country that will allow you to compete, to export, and to survive economically, and to ward off these attacks. Now, the one thing I notice here is that, let me say, the rail transportation network is not highly developed. Maybe this is an area where you could expand, right? You're importing all this oil. You're paying a lot of money to bring in gasoline and oil from abroad. Certainly, there is always going to be use here for a private car. Individual automobiles will be around more or less permanently. But could we not supplement that with public transport, with rail transport of the most modern type? I mean, in every other way, it looks like Europe. But then you say, well, where's the trolley car? Where's the train station? And there's none. If you come in at the airport, no train. I have to say, JFK Airport now has a train that takes you to the subway. That has not been there. So after 50 or 60 years, JFK Airport actually has a train. Even Washington Dulles Airport will soon have a train. So the train is coming, right? This is the hour of the train, rail transport. I think you should consider this. Let me show you some examples. This was a beauty that we had here. Wait a minute. I'm going to show you the nice one. There we go. That's the Japanese maglev. Now, wouldn't you like to ride to work in that in the daytime, in the morning? Get up and get on that. It's like riding to work in a spaceship. And of course, the speed, it's about, I mean, over a certain distance, it gets up to 500, 600 kilometers an hour. It's as fast as anything. It rides on a magnetic cushion. It's silent. When this goes by, whoosh, that's all there is. It's clean, it's silent, it's modern, it's fast, it's economical. I would say you need something like this for the island as a whole, for commuter in this area, and for freight. How are your farmers going to export their agricultural commodities? How can your miners export what they find? This is a perfectly good system for freight as well as for passengers. Now, that's the Japanese model. This is going, right? The Japanese get to go to work in that every day. This is the Chinese. The Chinese have gone with this in Shanghai, and the system that they chose is the German one, the Transrapid. There's a test track for this in northern Germany. And you can see it doesn't use a lot of space. The cows are right underneath the train. They like the train. The train doesn't disturb the cows, right? There's no objection to this from any point of view. So the other question that I would suggest is, what will your exports be in 10 years, in 20 years? And again, fisheries, good. Aluminum, good, certainly good. Agriculture is good. But I suggest that you think about something else. A field of production where Iceland can be the world leader. #1 in the world. Pulling ahead of everybody. World leadership in science, technology, research and development. I would suggest that you think about this because I don't know the answer. It should be high capital intensity. It's probably going to be high energy intensity. It's certainly going to be high wage. You've got to have a high wage economy. You can't keep a qualified workforce of the type that you have if you don't keep wages high. Low-wage economy is useless to you. It's useless to anybody, but to you more than anybody else. High added value, something ultra-modern. Can you find a cure to cancer and export that to the world? Can you find a cure to diabetes and export that to the world? Can you come up with some kind of energy technology? Can you perfect cold fusion? I don't know. In order to get the answer to this, you'd have to know where are the laboratories, where are the research institutes, where are the scientists, where are the experts, who has a patent? Very likely, who has a discovery? Is there somebody in Iceland that has a discovery that could revolutionize the world economy in some important way? You've seen the Finland, they did very well with cell phones, didn't they? Nokia and all that. Isn't there something more serious, right? More essential, more fundamental for the world that you could come up with, and that you could export and earn a lot of money? Earn money, not speculate, but value received, value added, high tech, R&D, and all the rest of it. So I don't know the answer. I urge people, this should be, I think, one of the main political debates here, is what's the future, right? Framtid? What are the future exports? Where are they? You got to plan this. This should be a debate. You shouldn't debate whether you're going to pay the British and the Dutch. No. Think about this. This is worth talking about. We started the debate last night with some people here. Now, tomorrow we're going to have, let's see if we, I think I have a, here we go. Here's another thing. World leadership. Again, you have a foreign ministry, you have embassies, you have diplomats. Use them. One of the things the world needs right now is an international debtors cartel. In other words, countries that cannot pay the IMF, cannot pay the International Monetary Fund, cannot pay the World Bank, cannot pay Wall Street, cannot pay the City of London, cannot pay the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. These countries need to unite. Back in 1982 and 1983, when Mexico declared a debt moratorium, there was an attempt to unite various countries, especially in Latin America, because we had the Mexican crisis, and then we had the British attacking Argentina. And I was part of an effort to see if it wasn't possible to bring together Mexico and Brazil and Argentina and say, guess what? Debt moratorium, contact us when you're going to be reasonable, and maybe we'll discuss whether we should discuss. But this today could be important. A very small country could provide world leadership today. When we look around ourselves, we see institutions which are increasingly bankrupt, intellectually, morally, and politically. And you can see that the world is being crushed under the weight of obsolete and discredited ideas. We have a world economic depression. The doctrines that created that, I would say, I'll talk about this probably tomorrow night. The depression, in my view, is caused by the Austrian school of political economy, of von Hayek and von Mises. Caused by the Chicago school of Milton Friedman. Caused by monetarism and neoliberalism and oligarchical and elitist ideas in economics. It is time for a practical and theoretical revolution in world economics to lead humanity out of the depression. The United States is not going to provide that leadership. There may be others who can. Putin, certainly an interesting thinker, but I don't think economics is really his strong suit. Maybe I'm wrong. So therefore we have a void of leadership. I would urge you to think about what you can do as an independent force, not bound by the European Union or other absurd constructs, to provide some leadership. And ultimately what you'd need is a new world monetary system. We have been living as, if you happen to see Mr. Helgeson's program yesterday, he had a businessman there, Franklin Jonsson, I think his name was, from Prague, who was, at least he talked to us about the fact that the Depression started in August of 1971, when Nixon ended gold convertibility of the US dollar and ended the Bretton Woods monetary system, which had worked very well from 1944 until 1971. What we need is a new world monetary system. But in order to talk about that seriously, we have to say that the burden of debt on the countries of the world has got to be removed in many cases. In my paper here, I quote the president of UNCTAD, right, the United Nations Council on Trade and Development, who recommends debt moratoria for countries that are heavily indebted. Well, welcome to the club. You are now heavily indebted, at least they say you are, and therefore you've got to conclude a debt moratorium. So I think that you're capable of great things, and I urge you to see yourself very much in that light. Not just a little country in a corner of the world, but a country that could revolutionize the entire world situation. So now here's what we have. 8 o'clock tomorrow, we have the causes of the world economic depression in the broader sense, and what can be done about that worldwide. And then, for those who are really hardcore, on Wednesday we have the danger of Obama, the president from Wall Street, because that is what he is. This is now the dictatorship of finance capital and the dictatorship of Wall Street. We'll be looking into charges that Obama is an empty suit on economics, and also that indeed that Obama was the most aggressive militarist of any candidate last year, running for president on a platform of bombing and indeed invading Pakistan, which is what he's doing at the present time. Pakistan being a country of 160 million with nuclear weapons. So I thank you very much for your attention.